So welcome everybody. Welcome to the session on inclusive mental health and wellbeing. My name's Kate and I'm with Arlene. Hello everybody, wave. So we're from a company called People Unboxed, and we're really pleased to be here delivering this session to you. So it's an hour's webinar. So in terms of interaction, you won't have your mics and your camera, but please do get involved in the room chat. In terms of questions, because we are tight for time, what we're going to do is we're going to pop our email addresses into the room chat at the end. So please feel free to get in contact with us. We welcome any questions that you have or any discussions that you'd like to have with us. So please do reach out to us at the end of the session or over the next couple of days if you'd like to. So this webinar is just an introduction. Obviously, we've only got 60 minutes to mental health and inclusivity. And it's just sort of going to give you a chance to reflect on whether you're doing enough, not just to support others, but yourselves as well. So we can't assume that everyone has the same experiences that we do. You may feel that you have sufficient support when it comes to sort of getting help with your own mental health and support, but remembering that we all have different starting lines and experiences. So not everyone has the same positive experience when it comes to identifying mental health issues or getting the support that they need. So there are more vulnerable people, individuals that are at higher risk of developing mental health issues, for example, those in underrepresented groups as one example. So it is about being mindful of that, particularly in a work context. We understand the journey that we're on with our own experiences, but it's just recognizing that not everybody has the same experience as we do. So it's about educating ourselves to try and ensure that all colleagues, all those around us, are getting any additional support that they need. So that's what we're going to look at today.
Thanks, Kate. So just a couple of housekeeping, very simple, as Kate's already said and myself, the webinar will be recorded, and don't worry, we will share it. I've seen that in the chat there, so we will share the recording as well. Now feel free, as we said, to use the chat function. We'll try and make it as interactive as we can within the next hour. Now, use of emojis, absolutely, if you agree with something, please feel free to use the emojis as well. Now, no cameras, as I said, but you can use the chat function as we go.
Brilliant. So the agenda, what are we going to look at today? So what is mental health? As a bit of an introduction, for some of you, this might be a starting point in understanding what mental health is in the workplace as well. But for others of you, it may be, you might be well versed in the topic. So we're just going to run through a bit of an introduction to what is mental health. Then we're going to look at some of the barriers. So one of those barriers is stigma. So we're going to look at how we can challenge stigma, identify what it looks like, and how to overcome it to support colleagues. Creating an inclusive culture. So if people don't feel included, it's likely that they're not going to feel confident enough to share if they are struggling. So how can we make sure that people feel included? Psychological safety. A lot of people talk, it's a hot topic at the moment. So we're going to explore what that looks like and how we can create a more inclusive culture where people do feel psychologically safe to show up and be their authentic selves. And then at the end, we're going to look at leading team wellbeing. So what can we do to proactively encourage people to look after their mental health? Good mental health doesn't just happen, okay? We have to work at it. So we're going to look at a couple of ways to team wellbeing and also building a little bit on resilience as well.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. So I think first of all, we maybe want to start with what is mental health? So mental health really includes that emotional and psychological and social well-being. Now it affects how we think, we feel and we act. Now everyone has mental health, and mental health is very similar to physical health and can fluctuate, but it is very personal to the individual. If you think about it, when I say the word health to you, you wouldn't really think anything of it. But when we add in that mental health, there really is a negative connotation to it as well. So if we really think about mental health like our physical health, we all have ups and downs depending on what's going on in our lives. And in the same way, physical health will not only be, when we're top of our form and top of our game, it just really depends what's going on our lives at that time. Now, just because we take a dip in our mental health, it doesn't mean that we'll automatically have that mental illness. It just means we need to have a look at what's going on in our lives and see what factors could be potentially affecting that dip in mental health. Now, it could be that you're maybe not getting enough sleep, or we aren't really asking for help, when we're maybe feeling a bit overwhelmed, and that could be both work or personal life. Now, mental illness is where we experience those kind of changes to our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviours and relationships, and that really can affect how we function day to day. Now, it means that we have to look at what's going on in our lives as well. So if we look at then mental illness, this is where we think about these differences of experiences, where we have those thoughts, those emotions, those behaviours, and that really can have a huge impact on how we function. Now, we know it's a real concern right now, and the difference between mental health and mental illness is looking at that mental health continuum today, and we'll look at where we can understand where we possibly are sitting. And it's just understanding that that can fluctuate and we can move up and down the continuum. Now, mental illness is not always curable, but it is treatable. And it's not necessarily that life sentence. With the right support, people can get better and live normal lives. And it's important that we don't label them right off. So it's really about taking the time to understand and supporting. Now, let's have a little look just now at what that mental health continuum looks like. Now, mental health, like physical health, as I said, can fluctuate. And it is very personal to that individual. Now, people often view it sometimes as them and us. And it might be that you've got good mental health and well-being, and then people might not. Now, in actual fact, every single person on the planet has mental health, which is really personal to that individual. And you can move up and down, and it can fluctuate. One moment you could be feeling really happy or really good and experiencing that excellent mental health, but then something could happen and that person really can see their mental well-being affected. And that's when you start to moving down that continuum. Now, probably the best way to try and understand is if you think about when you've got the cold, or maybe you're just feeling under the weather, mental health is no different. And then the difference is we tend to be more aware of our physical health, and we're in tune with it because it is more tangible. So if you think about when you break your leg, people come to help you, people understand. You might not be able to drive because you're in plaster, and then people will reach out to try and help you. Now, mental health is far less understood and far less tangible. And when things go wrong, it can happen slowly over time, and we don't really notice because there isn't really a defined period of recovery, where with a broken leg, it could be something like 6 weeks. Now, we're all weathering the same storm, but travelling in very different boats. And we've all been through quite a tough period. If you think back to COVID-19, the kind of last 12 to 18 months, though it seems to be further and further in the distance for some people, I think the key thing to understand is everyone's experiences are very different. And how we react coming out of it is very personal as well. Now, for me, I loved it, whereas for my friend, she didn't. And it's been mindful and considerate that not everyone will be the same, and it's something that's very personal. Now, we can't necessarily understand everyone's version of life in the last year, but we can recognise that it really is different for everyone. And one thing we can do is be kind. So what I want you to do quickly, I'm looking for a few answers there, is what other kind of things can impact people's mental health? So feel free to share what you think. Yeah, Donna, absolutely. And I think that's one thing just now that I'm worried about it. I think everyone's worried about it. The cost of living, family situations, employment worries. Yeah, there's lots and lots. Work, stress. Yeah, absolutely. And health issues as well. I think different periods in your life, you go through different things. Yeah, relationships also can have a huge impact. And then, yeah, Rachel, absolutely. Bereavements can be catastrophic to how you're really feeling. Yeah, money there again. And yeah, isolation. Yeah, the war too. Instability. Yeah, children. I think we were talking about that earlier, Kate. Kate's got a
we were.
so I think they change. So yeah, absolutely. And you can see there's lots of different things. So as team members, when it comes to supporting each other, even friends too, especially when you think about we may be working remotely now, or we might have that hybrid working. So I think it's even more important if we can to come on a Teams call so that you can actually see the person face to face. And then think about, there could be different factors impacting it. So it's important that you keep your eyes and your ears open for these. And there could be an indicator there for someone that their mental health might be in decline as a result. That being said, it might not be, it's personal to that individual. But if their mental health is in decline, hopefully we can pick that up early. And we can look at what we can do to prevent them from sliding down that continuum any further and really stopping it before it becomes a serious mental illness. Now, the way we're going to look at the session now is we're going to look at 4 different steps that we can do to promote that inclusive mental wellbeing, as well as some considerations and tangible actions that we can take away. So let's start first of all with how we understand the potential barriers. Now, we don't all have the same experiences when it comes to our mental health, but feeling heard and getting support, I think it's important that we understand that there can be many barriers for some people, and when it comes to trying to reach out for help. The correct support might not be there when someone reaches out, and it's also being aware of colleagues that might be more vulnerable or might be part of a marginalised group. Now, we shouldn't make assumptions about the journeys of other people and what they're going through. We can all be experts in how we feel and how we're treated and what happens when we reach out for help, but not everyone has that same experience. So it's important that we don't make some assumptions and just look at how we can educate ourselves better. Now, as you can see on the screen, we've just put up some barriers to give you an idea of just some different types of groups and marginalised groups that can be impacted. Now, this by no means is all of them. We would be here all day, I think, if we could show you and share with you them all. Now, there are many more. Now, recently there was a study at the Cambridge University, and they looked at neurodivergent individuals, and they found that they were 3 times more likely to leave a healthcare professional feeling that they had no help at all. So I think really a starting point for us is just to open our eyes to the injustices and recognise that with all of those different starting lines that Kate spoke about at the beginning and different experiences. Now, it's important to really educate ourselves on those topics and look at what barriers are there within your own organisation, and then look at how you can address this and support your colleagues accordingly. Now, I've just got a little poll for you. So I just want to ask you, do you feel aware of the potential barriers for colleagues in your workplace? Now, it is anonymous, so just a yes, a no, or a maybe. Okay. So quite interesting there. I'll just share the results with you. So 8 people there saying yes and 7 saying maybe. Any thoughts on that, Kate?
I think it's great that there's a lot of you that feel like you are aware of barriers, because that's the whole start, isn't it? It's the education piece and understanding what the potential barriers are. And I think leading on from that, I think that for those of you who are maybe, it may well be that you do have a bit of an understanding, but I think it's important that we continue to educate ourselves, okay, and never make assumptions. So it may well be that you understand barriers for yourself, or maybe those sort of that are close to you within the work environment, but making sure on a wider scale as well from an organisational point of view that we really try and educate ourselves and are fully aware of the barriers that there are for those around us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kate.
So we've looked at, there's a few examples on the screen. Another barrier is stigma. Okay, it's a huge reason as to why people don't feel comfortable to talk about how they feel or express themselves. So particularly in a work context, I think people could be worried about being judged, their job safety, career progression, all these sorts of things can be worries as to why people don't want to talk about how they feel. first of all, in the room chat, give me an idea. What is stigma? What does stigma mean in the mental health context? Give me a couple of ideas in the room chat. Labeling, yeah, absolutely. Fear, yeah. Yeah. So negative viewpoint without understanding, absolutely. Brilliant, yeah. So it's about making assumptions, prejudice, yes, absolutely. So in the context of mental health, there are two main types of stigma. Okay, there's the social stigma, which is the negative attitudes and discriminatory behaviours that society holds towards those with mental health problems. And then there's also self-stigma on top of that. So it's where people with mental health problems believe what's being said about their condition and maybe agree with society's viewpoints. Okay, so it's first of all about trying to address the social stigma within society on the whole, or within the culture within your company, so that hopefully then that filters down to how people feel about their own mental health and have that confidence. So it's really starting to think about and be aware of what does or could stigma look like within the work environment, so that then it's easier then to be able to tackle. So again, in the room chat, I'd love to hear a few examples of, for those of you who have seen it or experienced it, or if not, what could it look like? What sorts of things could we be hearing, or what could the viewpoints be? Give me some examples of what stigma looks like. Self-exclusion, absolutely. Just an excuse not to deal with a problem. Yeah, absolutely. Turning away, avoiding. Yeah, all these sorts of things to be mindful of. You know, within your work environment, within your culture, are people frozen out, so sort of ignored if they're struggling, or are they? But you know, why can't they just get on with it? You know, have to get on with it. Why can't everybody else? Skiving, absolutely, could be seen as skiving. If people do need to take time off, it could be people making jokes around it. Oh, another day off, you know, or using the negative language for those that do need to take time off. Becky, men don't have mental health issues. Absolutely. It's all this sort of negative language that we hear. So it's really important to be mindful of what it looks like. So, you know, it's true today that mental health awareness is increasing. More people are starting to talk about it. You may have come across the hashtag "It's okay not to be okay." It's sort of it's everywhere at the moment, and it's great that more people are talking about it. However, we must be realistic. Stigma is still a huge barrier, okay, preventing people from talking about how they feel. So it's about challenging our stigma, recognizing what it looks like, challenging our own stigma potentially, and encouraging others to do the same, so that we can start to have these conversations. We all have mental health. Okay, so why are we not talking about it more, you know, and normalize it? We all have ups and downs, and it's about really normalizing that and sharing that and really trying to challenge the stigma. So in terms of challenging that stigma, it's things like, you know, talking about it, normalizing it, you know, putting robust policies, procedures in place to be able to support people. Education is a huge one. A lot of people don't even know what mental health means. So educating people on what it means, challenging, you know, those that are creating the stigma. So, you know, challenging people on their negative language or their views. And that's, you know, a judgment call in the moment if you do that right there and then, or you take them to one side. But if you are taking them to one side, making sure you're checking in with the rest of the team, or anybody else that heard that conversation, to check in with them. Showing vulnerability as leaders as well, I think, and or as colleagues. You know, if you are opening up and talking about how you feel and normalizing that we have ups and downs, then it's far more likely that you're going to build that trust, and other people are far more likely to follow suit. So, you know, encouraging others to open up by showing vulnerability and making it part of the agenda, you know, bringing it to life, talking about mental health, you know, surveys, you know, wellbeing talks, you know, putting time aside in the diary to really explore it. There's a quick poll, I think, isn't there?
Yeah.
Darlene? Just a quick poll. So have you seen or experienced stigma within your workplace?
And I like the point that you made about vulnerability there, Kate. You're my person within work, and I think everybody needs a person.
Thank you. That's very kind.
Just the truth.
So have you seen or experienced stigma within your workplace?
Just a couple more to answer.
So whether you have or you haven't or you're unsure, it's just about recognizing, being really clear on what it looks like. Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of you have seen or experienced it. Be very, very clear on what it looks like, and then really putting things into place, but being really, really clear about putting agendas and procedures and policies into place to be able to support those. Yeah, it's a huge barrier.
Absolutely.
So what we're going to look at now is the inclusion part. So if a person doesn't feel respected, supported and valued, okay, within the work environment, then it is likely to have a toll on their mental health. So valuing it and embracing inclusion at work, it's obviously not just great for the individuals, but it actually makes business sense too. If people feel included, they're actually going to be more productive, right? They're going to show up, they're going to be in a positive mindset, they're going to be happy and healthy. So it's actually good productively as well. So it's going to like improve creativity, innovation, morale. Hopefully you're going to not have a high staff turnover, people are going to want to stay, and also great from a recruitment point of view as well. You know, if you want to you know, sort of increase on your talents, then what people want to do, they want to work for companies where people feel included and feel like they belong. So you know, equality is that fair opportunity. Diversity is having a diverse pool of talented people from lots of different backgrounds, life experiences. There's so much that makes us up as individuals, aren't they? So having people from all different walks of life is so important. And then that inclusion part is that step further. You know, you've got a diverse pool of people, but do they actually feel included? And that's the point here. So, you know, diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. Okay, so it's like saying, yeah, of course you've got a seat at this table, but you know, this is the way we do things here, is not making people feel included. Okay, absolutely. It's making people feel safe to speak up and express themselves and making people feel like they belong. We all have different starting lines. So it's about recognizing that sometimes we need to offer additional support to team members who need it so that they do feel like they belong and they do feel included. So that's why, as we said earlier, it's important to identify barriers, talk to individuals and offer any accommodations if necessary. And if people do feel like they belong, they're likely to feel far more comfortable to tell you and open up if they are struggling. Okay. And once people do feel included and safe, hopefully they're going to feel psychologically safe. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at now, is what is psychological safety. So it's about making your environment a psychologically safe one. Yeah, so this is where people feel safe to express their ideas, their opinions, speak their mind, admit if they've made mistakes, really, really importantly, and talk about how they feel. And this is a whole part of inclusion. Okay, people are not going to feel psychologically safe if they don't feel included, that they can show up and be themselves. So it's thinking about, you know, is your environment at work as it stands a psychologically safe one? If people feel like they belong and feel heard and appreciated, then it's likely to have a positive impact on their mental well-being. Okay, and there's been loads of studies around psychological safety. One of those, Arlene's going to share them in the room chat. So Amy Edmondson did a TED talk on hospital performance, and what they found was the lowest performing hospitals had the least recorded mistakes, and the highest performing hospitals had the most recorded mistakes. Because in the lowest performing hospitals, there was a fear culture. People felt too frightened to open up and say if they made a mistake. Whereas in the top performing hospitals, people knew that they would be supported. And it was a learning opportunity and everybody could let an education point. So it's about having an environment where people feel safe if they have made a mistake, that they're going to feel supported. There was another, also Google did a survey, Project Aristotle, that looks at lots of different factors in terms of staff retention and productivity, and psychological safety came out as #1. So it's really, really, really important. Another quick poll, Arlene, just to have a measure of whether you feel like your own work environment is psychologically safe.
Here we go. Just a few more.
And just as you're answering as well, and finishing up on the answers, it's wonderful if you do feel psychologically safe, and I'm really pleased. 40% you said yes, 30% no, 25% maybe. If you said yes, brilliant, but please don't make assumptions how everybody else feels. So that's where, you know, the surveys, talking to people, finding out whether they feel psychologically safe or not. And if it's a no or a maybe, it's thinking about, you know, what more needs to be done from an organisational point of view to make you feel psychologically safe. So really starting to identify what could be done.
Absolutely. And then first of all as well, we want to look at potentially where there might be biases. And it's looking at, first of all, the biases and the barriers in your own business. But it's also important that we recognise our own. Now, we all have biases, and that's just part of being human. And we don't always get rid of them, but we can learn to really understand them and not let them impact our relationships with our colleagues. Now, I don't know if we're familiar with the chimp brain, but this is how the brain works. Now, there is a book based on a simple model called the chimp paradox. Now, what I'll do is I will pop the link in the chat for you. I would thoroughly recommend the book, Kate. I don't know if you've read it as well,
Yeah,
but I've
yeah,
read it, and I think for me, it was a revolution. It really made me think. Now, in the book, they explore more than the two different parts. You've got another computer part as well, but that's for a different day. So our human brain is that logical, rational part. So that's where we think about our solutions to our problems, and that's where we really have that sound reasoning. Now, we'd like to think that all our decisions and actions are based in this, but really they're not. So we've got the chimp part of our brain. So that's the emotional part. So this is the prehistoric primal brain, which goes really back to that fight or flight principle. Now, all events that we're faced with really are filtered through here first. And sometimes we make decisions based purely on emotion, which sometimes we often regret, and we think, oh no, why did I do that? Why did I react like that? Now, unfortunately for us, the chimp brain's 5 times stronger and reacts 5 times quicker than a human brain. So when we're stressed, it says count to 10. Sometimes I know it's count to 20, but I think it's just how we really take that deep breath and allow our human brain that time to kind of catch up before we act in impulse. Now, flight, fight, or freeze looked after us in times gone by, but not really so much now. And we are unable to operate in that human brain when we're in that kind of chimp mode. So when people get stressed, that's when we tend to see the chimp coming out. And sometimes, quite often, people really struggle to think clearly or really try and solve the problem. And that can be why. So our brain might perceive anything different from being a threat. So it could be just working with different people. It could be someone you don't know. And it's important that when we're interacting with people, that we understand that they may be different to us. Now, the relevance here is the brain might perceive anything that's different as a threat. So that could be simple things like behaviours, could even be my accent. So it's important that we understand when they're interacting with people who may be different. I'm glad Steve read it. That's a few more people now in the sessions, Kate, that have read it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good way of trying to kind of control it. And it makes you kind of understand more, I think, the why you react like that sometimes as well. Now, moving on to our biases, it may mean that we make judgments or prejudgments, and we don't always have all the information. Now, we could respond emotionally with that chimp brain. So what we want to do is really use this as an honesty tool and consider what our biases might be. Now, you've got the affinity bias, first of all. So this could be for a protected characteristics. Perhaps it's more likely to be the way we work. So it might be you prefer to work with people that are detail focused and you're really steering away with people that are not like it. Or you could prefer working with someone that's an extrovert or an introvert. Then you move on to the confirmation bias. So that's more about the culture. So if you think about where do we get all our news and our information? So quite a lot of the time we're on social media, and then we maybe join a group. And then we look then at people that look like us, and we start to get those suggestions on social media for different groups that you may already be part of. And then when you think about Netflix, when you're watching programs, I don't know if you see it coming up, but, oh, you've watched this, so why don't you watch this? Now, it's important to be careful that you don't slip down that route of kind of confirmation bias, really backing up the things that you already think. It's about being proactive and really thinking about how do you find those different sources of information and look at how you challenge the way you think. Now, it's important to challenge this, step outside your comfort zone. So think about having that growth mindset. So if we move on to confirmation bias, that's where you're maybe in a situation where you don't really want to go against the flow. So you just go along with what's been said. Now, that might be what the majority of the group think like, but you just don't want to go against them, or maybe you just don't want to have that conflict. Then you've got perception bias. So this is probably the most common, and this one's based on that chimp reaction. So it might be protected characteristics, it might be different personalities, or you might think because that person's older, oh, they're no good with technology, and not give them that project. So it's about not making those assumptions. So think about a bias. If we think about it, then usually that's what we're thinking of. So really consider the 4 different types and determine where yours exist. So try and reflect on it and look at what personal interactions you've maybe had or what decisions you've made. That will really help. So once you've identified them, that's where it's important to be mindful and engage your human brain. So that's where, once you're more aware, then it is a lot easier to restrict that chimp brain. And think about that also when you're communicating with others too. Now, it might be there's different stereotypes. So we've all mentioned in the chat there about mental health illness, that we make assumptions, we make judgments. It could be, as we've said there, Becky said, men don't have mental health. And it's just about understanding that illness will be affecting people in different ways. Now, there could be a conformity bias in your department. It could be the culture that you maybe don't feel that you're comfortable to speak up. There could be that stigma there as well. So it's about how you challenge that negative language. Now, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Harvard bias test. So the test really looks to aim to measure the strength of that association between concepts and evaluations or stereotypes. And it looks at revealing your hidden or your subconscious bias. So what I'm going to do is pop that in. If you have got time, I would say set some time aside, because it doesn't take 5 minutes to do. So you really want to set some time aside. Oh, it helps if I can spell, Kate.
It definitely takes a while. I think there's a 15 to 20 different tests that you can do. So it might take some time, but it's a really great way for you to sort of start to have an understanding and hopefully bring unconscious bias into your conscious mind. It's all through word association. So, and it will tell you which way your preference is and by how much. So it could be a moderate preference one way, but it's for me, I don't know if you found, Eileen, it's not just the result, it's the light bulbs that go off as you're doing it. And you start to say, oh, maybe I do think in that way. So we find it really helpful to use. So it may be something that you want to try.
And I think it does help you if you're more conscious of it, then you're more likely to be able to control that chimp part of the brain as well. Right. And then I think it's as well taking time to communicate effectively and appropriately so that all your colleagues feel that you understand how they feel. And I think that really is a key skill. Now, let's look at how we support a colleague.
Brilliant, thank you. So, first of all, it's understanding the barriers, then it's being aware of your own biases, because we all have biases, right? It's about how many you have and how deep, and really trying to explore that, bringing it to the forefront of your mind so you don't let them impact, relationships around you, at work or outside of work. And then it's about not making assumptions, okay? So we shouldn't assume that everyone experiences things in the same way as we do. We're all coming from different backgrounds, life experiences, cultures, belief systems. So, we all process things very, very differently. So it's about never making assumptions and talking and asking and having those honest conversations. And it's important to take that time to connect, okay? And I think that quite often with the inclusivity sessions that I do, we are taking time to connect with each other. And, we don't all have to be best friends, but absolutely we should be showing respect and empathy to those that are very different to us. So it's about taking the time to get to know people. So we're going to pop a link into the room chat. This video I find really, really helpful to bring it to life in terms of inclusivity. We can have really opposing views from somebody within our department or within our company, but it doesn't mean that we can't come find some sort of middle ground. Okay, and sometimes it is hard to show empathy and respect to those that feel very differently to us about a certain topic that we feel very passionately about. But if we're given that time to be able to have the conversation and explore, quite often you can find a middle ground. So, but it's never making assumptions when we're having conversations. It's not always easy, obviously, to talk about mental health, but sometimes, just starting the conversation is enough. So that's what we're going to look at now, is how to start the conversation. So it can sometimes be difficult. It's not always easy. So what we're going to do is to make sure we're not falling into any traps. So first of all, don't blame them when you're having the conversation. So don't make them feel that it's their fault, even if you feel like you would be dealing with things differently in their situation. Everyone's emotions are valid, and it's about validating, and be careful not to suggest otherwise. Don't make judgments, don't make it seeing it from your point of view. This is the empathy piece, walking a mile in their shoes, okay? Remembering we're all coming from different experiences, upbringings, cultures, and really, really important to be mindful of that, particularly if you don't know that person very well. So really making sure we're not making judgments or prejudgments, which is, again, why it's important to understand your own biases. Don't use toxic positivity. This is something we all do because we're all human, right? So we do, and it's well-intentioned, toxic positivity, but it does get in the way, and it's a barrier for people from being able to open up and talk about how they feel. So this is people saying things like, it'll be okay, you'll be fine, look on the bright side, everything happens for a reason, you'll be fine, you've got great family and friends, you'll get through it. It's well-intentioned, and it's often subtle. We're all guilty of doing it because we all want to make people feel better. However, what it can do, it's a barrier, and it's going to maybe shut people down to being able to really fully open up and express themselves, because they might be worried, oh gosh, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe it's wrong to open up and talk about how I feel. Maybe it's not the right thing to do. Maybe they feel guilty or ashamed for doing that. So it's about really giving that space, and not fobbing people off with toxic positivity. And let's look at some do's instead. So instead of saying everything will be fine, it can be saying, I'm here, what can we do for you? Yeah, how can I help you? That's far more appropriate. Ask sounds simple, doesn't it? Ask, but it's not always easy. Quite often we ask people, how are you, and their response will be, I'm fine. So it's thinking about what can you say after that. So it could be asking twice. There's been a big campaign, I don't know if any of you were around, ask twice, because then it means you actually do care. So it could be asking twice. It could be just starting with a general conversation. How's your week going? How was your weekend? Get to know people a little more, ease them into the conversation. One I like to use is I've noticed. So I've noticed you haven't seemed yourself. I just wanted to check everything's okay. Because to say I've noticed means that you care enough, okay, to notice that there's something out of character. Reassure, absolutely. Reassurance is a massive one. Normalize. We all have ups and downs. It's absolutely normal to not feel great all of the time. Please know that it's okay. That's why I'm here. And I think reassurance is a huge one, particularly in a work context, because people can feel very worried that they're going to be in trouble, or there's going to be repercussions if they admit how they're feeling. So that reassurance piece is key. Listen. Nobody wants to be judged, okay, in the best of times, let alone that's something that can be really painful for people, to talk about how they're feeling. So really important that we're non-judgmental. And then empathizing. So that's walking a mile in their shoes rather than seeing it from your point of view. Just be there to listen. And I think sometimes people feel hesitant about talking about mental health because they're worried that they won't have all of the answers, they don't know what to say. Quite often with these conversations, you don't have to have all the answers. You're not expected to. It's just about listening and being there, and then sending people in the right place to get the support. And you'll be hopefully familiar with signposting in terms of with your own company. Maybe you have EAPs, or to their GP or to charities for them to get the support that they need. So listening is a very powerful tool. We all think we do it well, but quite often we don't. So this is a model by Stephen Covey. It's the 5 levels of listening. And it's just allowing you to be a little bit more mindful of how you listen to people. So you've got the first 3 there, which is hearing, when there's somebody else in the room and you just hear another voice. Pretend listening, when is we all do that. You're busy doing something, and someone's talking to you and you're not really listening. And then listening to interrupt is where you've got something you want to say as someone else is talking, so you're ready, you want to jump in with your answer, or maybe you just want to get your point across, or maybe they've come to you and asked a question, you know the answer, so you want to jump in, and we're all guilty of that. However, again, that can be a barrier, because if somebody wants to talk about something really, really important to them and you're just pretend listening, then the likelihood is they're not going to come back to you. So this is just about being aware of that and recognizing when it's appropriate to ramp up your levels of listening. And what we want to aim for is empathic listening. Okay, so that's intentional. That's you being there to listen, looking at body language if they're in front of you, listening to what they're trying to say, their tone, and seeing it from their point of view, not your own. Okay, and that's what's really important here. So trying not to let your initial assumptions or biases affect your response. So really being there with that person, and that's what we're aiming for. And if you have been empathically listened to, hopefully you know how wonderful it is. And we don't always need to be empathically listening to everyone all of the time, because it takes time, and it takes a lot of energy, and it's not always appropriate. However, it's about recognizing when it is appropriate. So, this conversation sounds a little bit more serious. I'm just going to make sure that I'm really here and being present. And lastly, it's leading by example. So not making assumptions, having that conversation, and then also leading by example when it comes to your own mental health. If colleagues and those around you can see that you are taking steps to look after your own mental health, they're more likely to feel comfortable enough to do the same. I know I certainly am. If I know that those around me are actively looking after themselves, I then have more courage to be able to say, do you know, I need to take that time. I'm feeling really overwhelmed, and I'll ask for help. So in the last section, we're going to look at what we can do to look after our own mental health and really promote a positive culture. So leading with face really ties in with the psychological safety piece. How can we create this psychologically safe environment? And a lot of that will be linked with these 4 parts here. So leading with face, so flexibility, authenticity, connection, and encouragement. And this doesn't just apply to leaders. This is just how whole teams, how you all interact with each other. So it's important to know, you know, you're not always expected to understand fully if a colleague is struggling, but sort of these sorts of things to be mindful of are going to help people, and you can use these sorts of steps in regular conversation to really promote a positive mental well-being. So it's about creating an inclusive culture, and you know, flexibility is a huge one with that, right? And if colleagues are given a little bit of flexibility, there was a study done by the University of Exeter that showed if you can give colleagues as much flexibility as possible over a bit sort of autonomizing their own work life, so whether it's work-life balance, whether it's flexible working from home, time off if they need it, they're happier and they could be up to 32% more productive. Okay, so being as flexible as possible is really important, and being flexible with working hours and shift patterns, absolutely, but could it be deadlines, being flexible on helping a teammate if they're struggling, if they need to, understanding different personality styles, so flexing your own style of how you communicate, how to manage people differently, if you want to give them support. Maybe some people want more direction, less direction, so being as flexible as possible to make that person feel psychologically safe. Open-minded, being adaptable, okay, so to what people need in that moment, so making sure you are flexible, and obviously non-judgmental as well, being flexible on that. Flexible on hybrid working styles, okay, for those that prefer it as well. There may be people that prefer to work from home, being flexible on people's communication preferences. It's quite obviously, if people are working from home, it's quite easy to fall into micromanaging if people are working remotely, but just being mindful of how you would normally act within the office. You would be checking in with everybody all of the time, so thinking end results rather than checking in all of the time, and making sure we're being flexible with those working from home as well. Authenticity, again, for me, is one of the most important ones. Lead by example. It's about being your true self. You are human, okay, you're not a robot. So it's about being open and honest yourselves about if you're struggling. And that doesn't mean sharing everything with everybody, but it's absolutely appropriate. You know, if you're struggling or having a hard day, and saying, do you know, to everybody, I'm just going to make sure I'm taking my full lunch break today because I'm feeling really stressed and overwhelmed, or asking for time off. If you're setting that example as a mental health champion when it comes to work-life balance, for example, then others are far more likely to feel the confidence to do that. So it's that leading with integrity and being honest, and it builds that trust. It's going to make other people feel at ease. So, you know, looking after yourself first, putting on your own oxygen mask on before you support others, because if you're not in a good place with your own mental health, then you're not going to be well equipped to support others. connection. Isolation can feed mental health problems. So how are you staying connected with those around you? And remembering from an inclusivity point of view, that doesn't always look the same for everybody. We need to remember respecting everybody's individuality. So, some people may want to stay connected via email, WhatsApp, whatever it might be. For others, they might throw themselves into social events or, want to be face-to-face in front of you. So, are you flexing enough in terms of connection? Have you got lots of different ways to stay connected with team members, but also remembering that from an inclusivity point of view as well? Are you giving as many options as possible to suit individual preferences? And then encouragement, could you be doing more in this area in terms of being supportive, encouraging people to open up, coaching conversations if people have made mistakes, making sure, you're happy to help, encouraging self-development, making sure people have a clear sense of goal, a clear sense of purpose, and that they are contributing and they're a valued team member. All these sorts of things, that encouragement piece is going to nurture people's confidence, and it's going to make them feel included. And again, when people feel included, they're far more likely to open up and talk about how they feel. So use this as a bit of an honesty tool. Where are your biggest opportunities? What are you already good at? You might feel like you're pretty good at being flexible, but maybe you need to work a little bit more on being authentic. So really start to think about what this looks like for you. Something else to consider is our individual resilience as well, okay, when we're talking about good mental health. So that's where Arlene's going to take over now and talk a little bit about resilience.
No bother. So resilience really is focusing on dealing with that pressure, and it's how you're able to bounce back and not get knocked back with those problems and those challenges. Now, if we can encourage your colleagues to build on their individual resilience, then they're really going to be more equipped to cope when they're faced with that adversity. So I like to think about it like a boxing match. So the bell goes ding ding, and then first comes the first punch in the face. And then that's when you throw a punch, and then you kind of dodge and weave. Now there's three things, that combination, and you may never have came across that before, but how do you move forward and get back up ready for the next challenge? And then the next time, you're more likely to have had that experience and know how to deal with it. And then think of your corner as where you rest and you recharge. So think of a place that you feel safe. Can you sit down, recover and reflect? And then when you're surrounded with people that are important to you, that matter and help, they can really aid that resilience as well. So how we develop our resilience, we want to break it down into 4 different parts. Now, this is just a very brief introduction to the resilience. We could do a whole 2 hours on resilience.
Yeah, I think we do a 4-hour session just on resilience. So this is light touch.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll try and give you some top tips. So staying positive. So that's really our ability to see the good and remain upbeat. And that's how we manage that energy and therefore the wellness. So think about what Kate was talking about. It's not about saying it's going to be okay, but it's how we stay positive. Think about what we're good at and support others. And then look at how we manage our own energy levels as well. And then if we're focused, we can have that sense of purpose and that sense of achievement. And that's when we can really stay on track and have clear goals. But also understanding that our own values and knowing what we value in life is really important. Then prioritise your time and make sure you fit in what actually counts to you. Now, dealing with uncertainty, this can be quite a tough one, especially right now with everything that's going on in the world, as we've seen right at the beginning, from the war to financial worries, just to everything that's going on in the world. Now, we really can exercise ourselves to be okay and push ourselves outside our comfort zone so that we know we're then better able to deal with that uncertainty. So wherever possible, push yourself and step outside that comfort zone. Really stretch yourself, because it will get easier. And look at how you can try new things as well, because that will help with the growth mindset. Then building agility, so being agile and being able to be adaptable and not being fazed by things that trigger us. So they may be triggered us in the past, so it's thinking about how you reframe it. I don't know about you, but quite often in my personal life, I'm always late. Not in my professional life, but in my personal life I'm. And it used to really kind of rile my friend. But now she's accepted it. So she's done a bit of reframing. So it's more about having positive feelings and take out those thoughts and emotions. Look at the facts, right? So what benefits is, right? So I've got an extra 10 minutes. I can sit and I can reflect or do a bit of mindfulness if that's what you like. And then it's about redirecting. When things go wrong, having people around us to help us really matters. But make sure you understand your triggers and then just pause. Think about what else might be going on. Now, think about lots of different things we do day to day take a lot of energy. We're all working in fast-paced environments where you've maybe got that decision making, you're in charge of a lot of other people, you could be in a leadership role. But as we said, today's world, it can be tough to switch off. But I think the key to being resilient is being able to deal with those knocks and bounce back. So think about your corner, think about where is best for you to take that time and kind of rest and recharge. And also think about how you switch off and recharge. We all do different things that work differently. And ironically, I do boxing, which helps me, but I've started kind of doing yoga too. So if you can, pop in the chat while Kate moves on. Let us know what kind of things you do to kind of switch off and recharge.
I was on a session the other day, Arlene, and somebody said that the way that they switch off is by ironing. I wish I could say the same, but that's definitely not one for me. Wouldn't it be great if housework was a way I could switch off?
I do love cleaning. I agree with what Sophie
brilliant.
But no, I
wish it was cleaning, but it's definitely not for me. My one is definitely walking my dog, or getting lost in a film. You know, that really switched my mind off. And it is so important to be able to switch off. You have to be able to do it and encourage others to do the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Fresh air, brilliant. No, I totally, and that's what kept me sane during lockdown, was actually being out a walk and see just feeling the leaves and hearing the birds. I love it.
And it's going to be different for everybody. Okay, so it's finding out what works and actively encourage people to do that. Do you feel like you do enough of that within your company, encouraging people to do it? So it's one thing saying, yeah, of course you must leave early if you need to, or, you know, that's part of our policy. Yes, absolutely, we encourage people to take breaks, but quite often that doesn't filter down. And particularly team members that don't feel included or not feel psychologically safe, they might not feel they've got the confidence to do that. So this is what we want you to do. Please do it and encourage people to do this as much as they can. What they enjoy, because actually then they're going to have far more headspace, and when they turn up to work, they're going to be happier, healthier, and more productive. So in terms of solutions moving forward, of things to at the end of the session today, things to think about is, in terms of mental health and inclusivity, putting mental health awareness training into place within your company, where however that looks like. It could be mental health first aid courses, it could be putting wellbeing champions in place, so those that are far more confident about the topic, people to be able to talk about it, bring it to life. You know, do you feel like you do enough of that? Is it very visible for all colleagues to see? If you do have things like EAP, again, is it very easily accessible for everybody? Cultural intelligence, emotional intelligence training. Cultural intelligence is a huge one at the moment. You know, the ability to be able to work with people from different cultures. So do you have any training for colleagues on cultural intelligence and emotional intelligence? You know, to be having that empathy piece and building on that. DEIA courses, so diversity, equality, inclusion and accessibility courses for colleagues as well. So really have that understanding of what we need to be doing. Are we doing enough as individuals to be able to recognise our own biases and overcome them? Obviously, we've touched very lightly on that today, but there's far more to do in that area. Inclusion strategies. So, you know, do you do any sort of communication workshops, identify people's preferences for communication styles, team building activities to really get people to get to know each other and have that opportunity to connect with each other? Do you feel like you do enough of that? Because quite often that some of the barriers are that we just don't have time to get to know people enough, so people don't feel included. Sort of social engagements. Wellbeing and psychological safety questionnaires, and I don't know if any of you do that within your companies, but I think it's a really great opportunity for feedback. And for some of you might feel psychologically safe, but we should never make assumptions that all colleagues feel the same. So I personally like anonymous ones. Some companies don't. I just think that people are far more likely to feel confident to say if they don't feel psychologically safe if it's anonymous. If you do have an EAP, great for wellbeing support, but if not, do you have other things in place to be able to support team members' wellbeing? And then also stress management and mindfulness workshops. Do you have any things in place to be able to support team members, to remind them to take a break, or if they are struggling, coping strategies to be able to do that?
Yeah, absolutely, Kate. And I think bearing in mind new employees as well, people that are coming in, will they feel the same as what existing? And I think that links nicely back with everything we've pretty much talked about as well.
Yeah.
So what I'm looking for now is just, if you can, in the chat while I'm talking through and just giving you a brief recap, is what did you find useful from today? Now I know it's been really quick, it's like 3 minutes to the hour already. It always goes so fast. So what one thing you found useful, or what you're going to change when you go back into your role? So if you could start to put them in the chat, that would be fantastic. And then it's just remembering that we all have mental health. How can we look at challenging and really breaking that stigma that's there just now? Use the resources. Now we've shared quite a lot of resources this morning. So look at taking that test, look at what your own biases are as well. And then reach out and talk to others and make sure they feel included. It costs nothing to be kind. It really does. But then work in your own resilience. If you're more resilient, then you're also able to help people more as well. But more importantly, take that time and really recharge and recover, because it does make a huge difference. And then I see Steve just said there, yeah, useful quick wins, good. I'm glad there's some resources there for you as well. Yeah, Rachel, I think being empathetic really is critical. It's especially showing someone empathy, and I think it is a skill you can learn. But looking at biases as well will tie in with that chimp brain as well. Yeah, listening again, and good tips and links, good. And you want to add, Kate, before we finish up?
I'd just like to thank everybody for getting so involved. It's only been an hour, I know, so it's been wonderful. I've really enjoyed, well, I've enjoyed myself, whether anybody else has. I've had fun. So what we'll do is we're going to pop our emails into the room chat. Yeah. Please feel free to reach out. Drop us an email.
I'll put our emails in as well, Kate, so we've got them. So again, absolutely
feel free. We're absolutely more than happy to answer questions that you have, or any advice, and we'd love to be able to hear from you, so please do.
Yeah, I think great what Becky's just finished on. She's very authentic. Yeah, I like to share thoughts and feelings as well. Yeah.
No, absolutely.
It is the right thing. Absolutely. It is the right thing. No, it absolutely is. And I think, it's been great to see people. Berlin and Italy, we'll need to add that to our list, Kate. I don't think that's on there.
No, it's not. Brilliant.
No,
thank you all.
We will share the recording, so don't worry, you will get the recording as well. And thank you very much, everyone. Take care.